Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest and greatest episode of the podcast Lowdown and Low Code. We've got a great guest lined up for you today, and we're excited to, we're introducing him shortly. As you all know, the Lowdown on Low Code analysis.tech team is very passionate beyond belief on everything to do with low code and all the connecting tissue around it. And the lineup today is actually to talk to one of the world leading SIs that actually does a lot of work in this space with clients and vendors. And so this is a different angle. Quite often we're talking to vendors. And so this is going to be a great opportunity for you to hear what it's really like to be out in the field and actually do this stuff. So I'm Francis Carden, and I'm going to introduce you now to Dave Marcus. Dave?
Thanks, Francis. Always great to catch up with you on these podcast sessions. As Francis mentioned, I'm Dave Marcus. I'm part of the analysis.tech team. And we have been, over the last couple of weeks, doing a little bit of a switch of moving from focusing specifically on vendors and in some cases on end clients themselves to focusing specifically on SI implementers, as Francis mentioned. A lot of the time we're finding that our viewers are getting a lot of benefit out of understanding what sort of real life implementations actually mean and entail. And so, these kind of sessions are really helping as well. Today, we are really happy to have on the call Greg Price from Virtusa. I'm going to have Greg introduce himself. And Greg, just as part of your introduction, it's always helpful for our viewers to kind of understand how you got here, where you sort of came from, maybe a little anecdote of something that very few people know about you. That's always kind of fun and interesting.
No pressure.
But give us a feel for sort of how you landed where you are today, and then we'll kind of kick it off from there.
Great. It's a great to be here, Dave, and good to see you again, Francis. Thanks for having me. My background and how I wandered into this space, greater than 30 years ago, I've been in the IT game, at least, focused on process-centric technologies, at least for the past 25 of those years. But through my 20s, I was actually a professional musician, a touring musician. And concurrently with those days, as I'd ride around in a van from gig to gig, I was writing the initial bit of software from which I built a company and run for about 10 years. We dealt in criminal justice and law enforcement, process enablement technologies, a multi-tenant, not in the cloud sense of multi-tenant, but in the sense that, the way a jurisdiction works, you might have a DA who's got 120 different police agency constituents. So I learned a bit around process design, orchestration, and BPM before I knew BPM was a thing. After that partnership, I participated in that company for 10 years, and sold out to my partners, and then looked for the next business problem to solve and decided I would get to observe a lot of word problems if I'm in the consulting game. So then I joined an SI, Cognizant, and I learned about Pega at Cognizant, digital platforms, low code, and quickly appreciated what took me 10 years to perfect. I could have created in 8 months with a lot less technical debt.
Yep.
From the 4GL technology I was working in. It was primarily C#, a little bit of Java, and an old callback to low code, Cold Fusion, if you can recall. But since then, I had discovered Pega, and as a consequence, Appian, JBPM, and all of its descendants from Camunda to Flowable or whatever it may be. These process enablement technologies. I joined Virtusa about 10 years ago. I took a brief break during the pandemic and went over to Ernst & Young and see what they know, and I came right back over to Virtusa. I returned to Virtusa because it is very congruent to my passions. Virtusa, it was not founded as a global systems integrator. It was founded to serve an engineering arbitrage of independent software vendors. We built digital platforms with software companies. One of those companies that hired us to help them out greater than 20 years ago was Pega Systems. So digital platforms, Pega, and certainly ServiceNow, Salesforce, Camunda, Appian, the usual suspects fall within my remit as the global leader of digital platforms. And as I said, Virtusa shines very, very brightly with digital platforms as we understand how these things are built. We built them. And we shine particularly brightly with Pega systems, but I will say that we have been very careful not to allow religion to arise inside of Virtusa when it comes to advising our clients on the right choices, because even though there might be a Venn diagram overlap between two different platforms, the right choice can be a little bit clear, and it does not need to lend itself to our competency or strength and competency to advise them properly. So
Good.
we carefully protect objectivity, even though we do have some close partnerships with some of these vendors.
So, Greg, some of our audience may not know Virtusa. Your name is not necessarily a sort of a household name as an SI, but you're a really large company. And so you can just maybe spend 30 seconds talking about the size of the organization and the sort of global focus that you have before we get into the detail.
Sure. Virtusa, we have always served in financial services, insurance, healthcare payer, healthcare provider, and telecom. We have served in public sector, in manufacturing, in logistics, but I would say that our banking, telecom, which is one business unit, our healthcare, insurance, and life sciences, actually where we're most prolific with digital platforms and low code. You would think perhaps banking, but healthcare is actually the long pole in the tent for us at the moment. And then we have another business unit called Technology, Information Services, Media and Entertainment, Time. And then our growth markets we support in APAC, which is generally focused around Singapore and Australia and New Zealand. But we're also putting a huge focus on Japan right now. And then the other growth market is, of course, the Middle East, continental Europe, and we have great strength in the United Kingdom. So that's
Fantastic.
yeah.
Awesome. So, Francis, let me hand over to you and we can kind of get into the meat of this.
Yeah, no, this is great. And we'll have to talk about this another time. But 40 plus years ago, I was working on a system in the UK called Home Office. And it was all to do with one of the first police systems, all around crime, criminal investigation, and just consolidating all the different regions into one place. And
it's funny because when I like explain the difference between case management and process management, I always tend to go back to these criminal justice case stories because I think they're accessible. But then everybody thinks I've been through the criminal like I got arrested or something.
No. Yeah, you got that. When did you get let out? No, it's not like that. Yeah. No, so listen, I think it's fair. Listen, I think what you're certainly with the SIs we've been talking to, and we're going to have a few lined up for us coming up. But you are in a unique position because you get to get the inside view from the vendors, and they talk about their roadmap just like they talk to us about it. But you also have the perspective talking to them about what your customers are seeing, what you're being successful at, what you're not being successful at. Sometimes you're going in and picking up maybe a client that hasn't been successful with another vendor, and then you are, and vice versa. I mean, we none of us can say we have 100% success track record with all of our implementation. So hopefully we can touch on some of that today. And I think that's going to be really interesting for our audience. And that's our focus. But let's just come back to something that's happening in the moment, right? I think it's fair to say that what we're witnessing today with AI, it has reignited many passions in the low code world. some people didn't know what low code was. And sometimes I explain it by explaining it what high code is. What did it take? You mentioned the term technical debt. We touch on that a lot. It's hell on earth. If CEOs are listening, as they often do, they know what technical debt means. It's that, in perpetuity cost and ever increasing cost, like our own governments, right? Where we keep spending money and can't do anything about it. But what AI has done is reignited the passions around low code, because these base models really love ingest AI on steroids because they've already got that governance layer. And so putting AI on it is a lot safer than just saying, okay, go at it with code or go at it in an ad hoc manner. Are you seeing the same with your clients and even your prospects? Are they seeing a resurgence or a renewal or suddenly hearing about this for the first time? And how does Virtusa respond to everything that is going on around AI in your practice?
Well, it's a mixed bag. I would say that a lot of the buying behavior is overcoming a season of just being incredibly pensive about the art of the possible, and what these capabilities are, understanding the risk. It is very new. I would challenge, I mean, I don't think I've spoken to anyone professionally that had heard the term agentic greater than 10 months ago. And I can't get out of a meeting without talking about it, right? So there is a lot of activity. I think we've overcome this period of exploration where we've kind of drifted away from the standard of an ROI. When we actually open up our laptop lids and do something, there was this tolerance of experimentation that I think is coming to an end. Although I still encounter some pensive individuals in leadership positions. Every week we hear about something which, when we wrap our mind around it, it's massive change, if we consider what's possible. And I see some executives that are just waiting for that week to come along where the easy button comes out to do some of these things. So far as low code, I think with generative AI and the trajectory of enterprise IT, I think low code is the right answer for the business applications layer. But I think that a lot of the buyers are also saying maybe it's the exact wrong answer, right? I've also seen a pro code
Yep.
narrative of resurgence, in the sense that if we're able to generate 4GL, why do I need a digital platform? And I believe the answer to that is what the answer has always been: burying the articulation of business in code. Even though it was generated by something, it still needs to be audited and reviewed, which is actually a higher level of talent to properly review an application versus writing it. We could debate that, but I think that it requires more engineering seasoning to be able to review an asset. And it needs to be audited to make sure that the prompts were properly interpreted, and that there is, it's free of hallucination, which is, not always going to be the case. I think, but there is that narrative. If we're able to generate this code, let's just build everything. But
Well,
again,
I think there is an element on generate code, and I've spoken a bit about this, is that yes, you can use AI to generate code, and I'm actually okay with it as long as it creates code in some model form and you don't have to touch it.
Mhm.
If AI continues that management of that model, then it's okay to me, because let's be honest, 4GLs, love the old term coming back, but low code 4GLs and others, they generate code underneath. You just don't have to touch it because
Mhm.
it's to a model.
Mhm.
And I think we are seeing organizations like IBM and that they're looking at a lot of these capabilities for AI to generate
Mhm.
code. But again, within that constrained model, you do touch on something maybe we'll cover later before I hand off to Dave. But I do, and I have seen this, and call me the old geezer or whatever. But I've seen a lot of these executives, they're too career based and they won't take that risk.
Yeah.
This is real. This is not like 10 years ago. We say, oh, it's too big to fail. We can't change. We got this
Mhm.
legacy debt. We are different to everyone. Our bank's different to every other bank. Well, you know what? Enough with this,
Yeah.
because these execs, and I think the board and the chairman needs to look at this and say, do these execs actually care about the long term, or are they in it for their career base? And I think that there's an argument now that says we need to put up or shut up in some of these instances. Sorry to make that bold statement out of Dave before I know you had a point here to make.
That's right. The other element before we drift off into the next topic, though, I'm also seeing in the low code space a brewing allergy to vendor lock. I don't want to be locked into ServiceNow. I don't want to be locked into Salesforce. I don't want to be locked into Pega, it's informing more composable architectures, which I'm a fan of. Not necessarily discrete architectures, in the sense that there's a functional segmentation of capability, but a composable architecture, a non-functional segmentation of the technologies. I think, very healthy debate going on.
I think before, but I think lock-in used to be something seriously to consider, but these days, surely people are locked into their cloud, they're locked into their hardware, they're locked into their network. All these things have gone away. So as long as, and the vendors themselves are themselves not locked in anymore.
That's
right.
True.
They used to be locked in. Oh, well, we built this on an IBM platform or Unix platform and it's in C# or dot. They are not doing that anymore. So I'm not for sure I buy into this vendor lock-in as much as others. But again, another subject for another day. Dave, I know you had an important point here.
Sure. So, Greg, let's kind of continue on this thread that you've been talking through. So obviously there is an insane amount of AI noise out there, both in its own right as well as in the context of what it means for these reimagined applications. I know that reimagined is a term that Francis loves. He uses it all the time, and we do as well. But this idea of how do you get to a point where you're advising clients on staying pragmatic? It doesn't surprise me in some ways that people are concerned about vendor lock-in, but in what I'm seeing right now, a lot of it comes down to the fact that there are hundreds or even thousands of these net new startups that are doing things. And a lot of those net new startups may be doing very specific things that feel valuable, but no one knows whether they're going to be around for the next 12 to 18 months. And many of them have failed. And so, how are you kind of advising clients in terms of sort of staying pragmatic? What does this sort of look like for you? And then, you made the comment around, these tools that generate code. I'm also interested in, to what extent are you getting a view from people that say, look, why do I need someone like an SI to sort of build these apps for me when I can just vibe code these things and create them? Or at least that's what the industry is telling me. And then, I think you made another point earlier on that says, and as well as Francis, that says, as long as these things are sort of model driven, where you have a proper management paradigm behind the scenes, that's probably okay. You look at tools like Cursor and Lovable and, all of these type of products out there today that are generating code, and they're generating an insane amount of code. And at the end of the day, you sort of look at things and go and say, is all the IP kind of sitting in that code? And at some point in time, how am I going to actually tell, assuming that I wanted to make changes and I want to do them outside of my, outside of that environment, can I in fact do it? What does it mean? And do I need to go back to figuring out what the heck the code actually was and how to work with it? Because that's a big challenge. So quite a few questions, but I guess it's all about kind of figuring out, how do you advise clients around staying pragmatic?
I tend to use the term sobriety. Sober up. It's all very exciting. But let us not allow ourselves to become intoxicated on the art of the possible, because, from this visage point, and speaking to our imaginary client here, your enterprise is not ready to take to alter enterprise computing at this bank or insurance carrier or whoever it may be. There is too much technical debt. There is process debt, and even people debt, to be quite honest. When I start to talk about being pragmatic, you try to create a vision of an enterprise architecture that, is pursuant of some beautiful cathedral of technology, whereas we all know that that's not how IT works. IT doesn't allow you to build a cathedral. It's a fish market. It's a marketplace. It's messy. So when I come into these conversations, I tend to come at it from viscerally, from this angle of throttling debt, remediating debt, so that we can pave the way to this next generation of enterprise computing, which is, of course, agentic AI and whatever else they come up with next. Now, when I talk about technical debt, I know technical debt cold. Now, I told you I built this company over 10 years, and as a young man, and I was a lightning bolt. In my 20s, I was a wunderkind, right? Like somebody who's young, but is really like knows what they're doing and really good. Now I'm almost 50 and I'm not special at all, right? But when I was young, I became very arrogant and would experiment in the creation of a software product, right? Anytime you adopt a new design pattern, which I did invariably, all prior design patterns are now anti-patterns. You've created technical debt. Technical debt will creep in organically just from the toil of development. And indeed, even the vendors, the low-code vendors, will create technical debt by ripping a linen cloth from your beautiful table setting away, and now you have to adapt your application to whatever the whims are of the platform. This debt needs to be handled, right? And I think attention needs to be paid to that. There seems to be an awakening to that these days, where they're addressing technical debt. I don't yet see an awakening in process debt. We used to talk about digital transformation in this golden triangle: people, process, and technology. These are the contributions. All of these things must transform. But at some point, we got so infatuated with the gadgetry of IT that we stampede towards implementations, and we're not allowing for proper admiration of a process network to make sure it is indeed harmonious and on a footing for digitization. And then on the people side, I walk through. A bank needs bankers, and I don't know a lot of bankers, right? The people that really understand, it's really around creating the digital domain, and I think that there's inherent existential risk in the not having a carbon-based knowledge center in an organization. It's all been digitized, which is good, healthy stuff. But I do think that expertise is perhaps being overcome by digitization. That might be a little bit, as a propeller head technologist, that may not be the, what most people say, digital. But I actually believe that, that innovation is going to happen from intimacy with the business and the goals of the business. And I think that that's a human element. So with the amount of debt and the connective tissue of IT systems, they're hardening that debt, making it more difficult to come across. We can move the chains on these next gen capabilities today. We can, but to really reimagine enterprise IT, pursuant, I think, of the shining city on the hill, which is, low code, as in the business layer, a transactional layer giving you access to the data, and a clean estate of entity data. That's the nirvana state. We're a long ways from that before we can really achieve the agility and what's really possible with what we know is possible with these capabilities.
So, Greg, on that point, I think this is as much. I mean, listen, technical. I like the way you describe people debt as well. Technical debt. We grew up when the computerization era came along. Most applications were built by people that didn't know their domain and the domain experts. You couldn't do one without the other, right? The domain experts had no idea how to code, and the code and the the coders wouldn't know what to code. So you had people coming out of those industries, from banking, from insurance, right, from healthcare. They knew the process. They knew the process manually. It was done on pieces of paper with a pen and a pencil, right, sometimes an eraser. But that era's kind of gone. We don't have people that understand the processes and how they actually work. But I'm not sure that's a bad thing, because technology and computerization era is kind of disappearing and rolling up into this. Well, why does a bank need 6,000 applications? And I know a bank that does, that are different to another bank's 6,000 applications. There are new banks starting up without buying a single one of those 6,000 applications and building things in these model-like ways. Starling Bank is one that comes to mind, where they built themselves effectively a low-code platform internally, but proving it works. They're now not beholden to a multitude of technologists and domain experts, etc. So that's something we could perhaps drill into later. But I wanted to bring us back onto the SI role here, right? So this is something Francis was passionate about. So sorry, I wanted to get that in there. But I think you are really in an envious position, right? So I want to flush out some things here, because we've criticized many low-code vendors openly about their made-up or not thought-through competitive analysis. We're the only ones that do this, especially with AI. I mean, I hear it even David and I hear it all the time. We're the only ones that do this, and look how it's better. And they show you, and it's like, well, do you know there's 7 other vendors doing the same thing? Try to focus on something that really matters. But you get to see all the products, all the marketing, all the buy side, sell side, etc. So where can you help both the vendor and the client see through all this chaff, right? You know, and where is AI and low code delivering on the promises? Where is it falling over? And what advice would you even have to the vendors today who are competing in what is, I think, an even more competitive market? Because you've got some of the larger, even cloud vendors trying to come up and participate in this game.
Yeah. We do spend a lot of time, you know, with clients, you know, as they, you know, experience the fog of war. I got Pega, I got ServiceNow, I got Salesforce. When do I zig and zag and use the other one? And these guys over here are using Camunda now. I have Mendix on this side of the business. And this, I think, again, goes back to this idea that, you know, IT is a fish market. You know, you're gonna
I like that
you're gonna
analogy,
have
Dave. That was
multiple
good.
different constituents. You know, yeah, they're gonna have a point of view. Sometimes, you know, I'll use the term again. You know, there's sometimes there's religion that enters in. I'm a full stack leader. We're gonna build it. We're not gonna buy anything. We're gonna code it all from the ground up. Or in my last role, we had ServiceNow, had all this success. Let's implement it here. You know, there's you know, different. The leaders will come in with their different wares or propensities to build things one way or another, and that's just going to happen. And we need to do our best to create some, you know, harmonization. And again, I think the composable architectural paradigm allows for this a little bit. But the other point, Francis, is one that you've already sort of pointed out: the terminal uniqueness of our clients, right? You know, you know, there's if it's not built here, you know, it does not represent our business, right? And in those conversations as an SA, I try to, you know, pull them back into architectural doctrines around separations of concern, or perhaps the pace layering strategy that Gartner talks about: systems of record, systems of differentiation. Am I truly differentiated? Adopt the process then. If it is not differentiating your company, if you're not enhancing revenue or retaining clients or improving operational costs, you know, then just adopt what you have there in your SAP solution. You don't need to
Yep.
overlay some low code. Just adopt it. If it's truly differentiating, though, do it in this layer. Don't
But it
do it in your
rarely is. It
ERP.
rarely is. I think the bits you want to be differentiating on are the bits that matter, not the 98% that doesn't actually
Yeah,
matter anymore. That's my take. Dave?
indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk more about this, you know, in Francis' next topic on orchestration. I'm going to take a really quick break. For those of you who either have been following us or are new to following us, Analysis.tech is a small, focused boutique analyst firm. We, like everyone else, we do a bunch of research, but at the same point in time, we spend a lot of time focused on looking at the reality and practicality of the way that these technologies work, rather than just what a vendor might tell us. And we think that that's part of what makes us a little different. We encourage you to continue to sort of watch these podcasts, take a look at some previous ones that we've run. We've had a ton of really great feedback from people around this sort of pragmatic approach to these, particularly these podcasts, and to our research content. Go to Analysis.tech, sign up for some of our research. It's available to you at no charge. And certainly give us feedback on what it is you'd like to see from us moving forward. We're continuously sort of evolving as the space is evolving, and hopefully kind of staying ahead of the game. So with that in mind, Francis, back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think this has been an interesting conversation so far. We've got so many topics we can have spin-off conversations about here, because I do think one of the things that Analysis.tech and all of us passionately is that we're trying to get these leaders to just, it's time to move on from this legacy debt. And I know you have to deal with reality, Greg.
Mm-hmm.
If a client or a prospect is telling you this is what they want to do, it's very hard to say, no, we're not going to do that, right? You have to sort of like placate to get an inside position to be able to really then articulate those strengths. And I think we are in a position, Greg, to actually just say what we really think, because I think it is time for some of these organizations to wake up. And I love your fish market analogy in the cathedral. That was really cool. I've never considered it that way, but I think about the cutting room floor of IT and the landscape of IT. That is exactly a fish market. It's guts and all, right? I mean, all right. So anyway, let's fill this on. So Dave and I are passionate about low code, as with the rest of the Analysis.tech team. But in amongst all of that, and it's something I really was passionate about when I joined Pega, and I never understood orchestration or things like case management. And listen, I'd already been 40 years in IT, so how the hell I didn't know about case management, I don't know. But anyway, that's something I'll figure out one day. But orchestration of work for me, the good, the bad, the ugly work. I don't care if it's done manually by an RPA bot, by a piece of low code or some IoT. I don't care. But if you orchestrate all work, you get a huge amount of visibility. And that visibility allows you to start thinking about prioritization of the process, the tasks, or even the entire application. So does Virtusa support this narrative? Are you on board with this? And are you seeing clients successful when they think about process in a much more, I don't just use case because it's not just case, but orchestration centric view in order to get to this ultimate end game?
Yeah, it's if if you can get enough attention to be applied to actual process design,
Have
that
them talk to us, Greg. We'll get their attention for you.
We at Virtusa very much embrace, I guess business process management isn't a popular term anymore, but BPM was, I think BPM got hijacked by the vendors, right? And we started to refer to BPMS.
Yeah.
But BPM has always been a management paradigm, an execution strategy, where we steward over processes as a central asset to the business, as if it is as crude as the products that roll off the factory shop floor. The process needs that level of stewardship, and we have a technique called the process governance life cycle and the learnings of BPM, which has been on for 40 years to learn from. But our attitude towards process may have shifted, right? Whereas Lean Six Sigma will have us to focus on the abstraction of process so that we might have standardization of process, where now we have sort of a segment of one where hyper personalization of process is key and important. But as we put the process on a steel thread and digitize it and elaborate on it and exploit opportunities for automation or even systems of agency to start influencing that process, we have a technique that we use which informs our well, are, the design of enterprise applications, as well as the design of the process network pursuant of Harmony. We hear requirements as an SI. Let's transform. Let's go talk to a bunch of business people. Let's look at a bunch of SOPs. Let's look at a bunch of assets, and we get requirements. And requirements are great, but it's the blind man's touch of the elephant. This is the experience I want to have when you provide software for me. Okay, that's great, but it doesn't tell you anything about the way to properly construct the software pursuant of enterprise leverage and to throttle, again, technical debt. We use a technique called base camp. While we're eliciting for requirements, we're recording the requirements, we're generating user stories and things like that, but we're also indexing on ability statements. You may be talking about the ability to change an address, and you're talking about, okay, first we got to do this, then we got to do that, and then we got to send them a piece of mail that says we changed your address, and here's the process, and we record all that and the requirements and all that. But we index on it with ability statements, the ability to change an address, or they could be atomic in nature, the ability to request a change of address, the ability to receive a change of address, the ability to authenticate an existing address, the ability to authenticate, using geocode or whatever it is, the authenticity of an address, right? All of these capability statements are then overloaded with these attributes. What line of business needs this capability? What channels does this capability need to be delivered through? What personas are going to be impacted? What sources of truth are going to be impacted? For CRUD operations or whatever it is. Once we have all it could be 200 attributes, but we run analytics on those. It informs priority. It informs where there's commonality for reuse and leverage, so that we're not creating abstraction where abstraction isn't needed. It funnels our attention to the right design, but it also informs the right process, right? Because capabilities are ultimately what the process needs to deliver. So we do.
Well, it's kind of why, process mining became a thing because people didn't understand how they did work.
Yes.
Orchestration to me is an understanding, and you can't, if you orchestrate everything, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but if you orchestrate everything, you have that visibility. Then you can have people say, well, do you need faulty versions of an address change? No.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you have to say no. Mm-hmm. If there's ever been an era of reuse, it's today. We were promised reuse 40 years ago. Everything we do right once. And then, of course, it gets copied and duplicated a million times. I think somebody should be fired if they ever have the same task or process duplicated across the business, let alone once more than it needs to be. They often duplicate it 50 times. And I think that is back to the point it's trying to have a homeowner build a house, design a house, but then start getting involved in how the foundation is built. It's got to stop. And I think we're into that era. Dave.
Awesome. So, Greg, I guess, do you see this problem kind of getting worse? And by worse, I mean, there are hundreds of vendors right now producing apps, AI agents, whatever the case may be, that are delivering some type of very specific value, or at least perceived value. Something's got to kind of coordinate all of this together. And you almost get this, like, in the same way as we had vendor sprawl, it's not like it feels like it's getting better. It almost feels like it's getting worse. Yeah. And so something's got to sort of coordinate that worse. So I'd be interested in your opinion on that. The other thing, maybe if you can just talk on for a minute or so, is, without, necessarily saying anything you're uncomfortable with, is you're partnered with a couple of different vendors today, with a Pega, with ServiceNow, with Salesforce, with Microsoft, et cetera, et cetera. In your mind, how do you think about sort of partitioning where those are strong versus where others are stronger? And, I guess in your mind as well, are they winners?
Well, I suppose it's capricious for me to say I don't have a crystal ball. We can see that.
Dang, that's the only reason you were invited on.
Right. I do see a lot of the marketplace around orchestration is everybody's raising their hand and saying I am the orchestrator, which I think it's important to have those that orchestration is key. And we saw this with back in the days of robotics. We would see a swarm of robots, and again, there it is again, technical debt was
Yeah.
inherent to that, and it needed to be sort of contextualized within the long living process of the business, and the robotics needed to be deployed from something that's more of a hive than a swarm of bees, right? So I think
Yeah.
that was a key learning, which I think we've brought into this space. And the dovetail from RPA seems to be one of the more natural things that we're seeing, like with what UiPath is doing with orchestration and all that. But I see everybody raising their hand to say, I want to be an orchestrator. Um, and I think I think that's important capability to have in the enterprise. But again, composable architectures. It can be it could be Pega using their agentic process fabric. It could be UiPath. It could be Agentforce or Control Tower over on ServiceNow. That's doing that. And then we're also seeing platform vendors actually creating AI agents that are dispositioned that you can manipulate for your different tasks. It's interesting how that's coming together as well. We see some that again, lots of noise out there. Some messages I think are becoming more clear than others, right? So, like, I mean, I think Pega's message is very clear. They will tell you with agentic, we are truly agentic, reasoning at design time with blueprints and all this stuff that's surrounding blueprint these days on Pega. Reasoning at design time, semantics only at runtime. And although those are agents, AI agents, they're more agent-ish rather than truly agentic with a direct line to some LLM somewhere, and with reasoning in their wicket. So that's a very different approach from Pega. Their predictive AI agents, their agentic process fabric, a lot of it is actually conventional Pega that has sort of opened up to having, I'll say, AI agents as a first-class citizen in a case rather than a stage or a step in a case, right?
Yeah.
And then whereas in Salesforce, we're seeing fully functioning agents coming through there. I would say that across the board, though, in the AI noise. It's important for us, at least in Virtusa, one thing that we've done is we've acknowledged the new design pattern that all this means. We don't have to build complex digital platforms as much as we used to. We don't have to build the decision matrix or use the full power of a rules engine and forward and backward chaining to overcome all this complexity. Some of those complexity calories could be shifted to the AI agent, and we can produce digital platform assets, the steel thread of the workflow that articulates the business. Where are my agents active? What have my agents done? What do I need to do to take the wheel as a human actor? The amount of behavioral rules development to proctor the user's behavior in the digital asset is much, much less when you can shift a little bit of that to the agentic. So I'm focused on accelerating conventional development with agents as a persona. That's a huge impact, but
Very
that's
agree.
conventional in nature, actually.
Yep.
I don't know
Very
if that
agree.
answered the question, but that's kind of where my mind went when you asked it, Dave.
Yep. Absolutely.
So I think that what's important that a lot of people don't understand is when you apply agentic to all of these models, all the vendor models, I think AI in the model is really the acceleration of development. You can fail fast. The promise of
Yep.
fail fast was just more technical debt, let's be honest, because somebody would use it. What you failed at, it would go into production next week because they
Mhm.
needed it scarily. But now you could truly fail fast. I mean, you can build stuff in literally, you have AI build something and go, that's shite, right? I'm going to
Mhm.
go have to build something else. Go, oh, that's good. Now you can go in and say, well, would it stand up into production, or do I need to build it in something else? And so I think all these models around the low code are really accelerating things for the business. So, and I did talk a little bit about Starling Bank earlier about these models and things that are being built by clients themselves. They're building their own models and using their own AI techniques, and they're getting very clever. Starling Bank actually was so successful at building the model for their own bank, they spun it off with the Starling engine and go and sell bank in a box
Mhm.
virtually, right, as a vendor. So that'll be an interesting what transpires over the next 10 years. What are you building? I know we're getting close to wrap up time, but what is Virtusa building any IP?
Sure.
And leave us with any everlasting, our audience, with any everlasting thoughts or a message that you want to leave them with, something that you've seen maybe particularly mega successful or cautionary, or leave us on any spinning note you like. You've got the floor there.
Sure. Well, so far as IP goes, when it comes to my practice, the IP is usually manifest as an accelerator, something, some prefabricated asset.
That's been replaced by AI now,
Yeah.
so that's fine.
But it's a prefabricated asset. We bring it to a client, but from henceforth, it's been forked from the
Yep,
product. We're not maintaining a product. It's an accelerator. So we
makes
do
sense.
that a lot with digital platforms in our articulation of accelerators that may be native to the platform, but also those composable elements that need to come together. For instance, integrating AWS IDP into Appian, for instance, or Google CCAI dialog flow using Pega as the fulfillment engine, right? These are assets that we create. But I think the real clearinghouse for innovation at Virtusa is under the banner of what we call Helio. Helio is so named as the Greek god who would drag the sun across the sky to shine the light of the sun on all the Greeks. And so goes it with Helio, shining the light of generative AI capabilities across all of the Virtusa practices, right? So we have delegates in my practice to the Helio narrative, but Helio is really where we're creating assets that are, very, of course, AI in nature. A lot from some boutique partners, some of our more bellwether partners in the digital platforms, but mainly with the hyperscalers. And we're seeing a lot of our products come from those guys. But as far as parting thoughts, I mean, at this moment, I would encourage business leaders and IT leaders to, focus on putting that interstate system together. America is a very different place after Dwight Eisenhower created the U.S. interstate system. You need those roadways. You need the rules of the road, right, for agentic to work. Those agents need to be relying on a steel thread. They can't be knocking around the enterprise like a pinball. And
Amen.
and with what I'm seeing, a lot of agents are being deployed a little bit like that. But it's early days. Let's see if it works. But I think the tolerance level for see if it works, give it a go. I think that's wrapping up right now. So far as
That's
when we
fair.
deploy these AI agents as Virtusa, we exercise, given the debt in the enterprise, we have to employ a theory of constraints, right? When I encounter a constraint, I don't stop everything to fix that whole problem around the data hygiene or whatever it is. I just need to overcome that one singular constraint so that I can prove this out. But you'll quickly find that the constraints are numerous. I would
Yep.
encourage leaders, and this is where, at least I'm very focused, remediating debt, replacing the debt with new design patterns that pave the way, again, literally paving the road that is needed for that agent to traverse, overloading that road with the rules of the road, regulatory rules. A lot of this stuff you do not want to leave, to, an operational dynamic decision.
Yep.
So again, my mission is the remediation of debt in business, and there's a lot of that to be done. And that's a lot of what we're focused on.
It sounds like the same mission as Analysis Tech.
Yeah.
Back, Dave, to wrap.
Awesome, absolutely. I think those are some really good parting thoughts, Greg.
Indeed.
So certainly appreciate that. And and as Francis says, it's consistent with our findings and our thinking as well. We'd love to thank you for being on the call today. Look forward to chatting to you again in future. And it's been a pleasure having you on.
You bet.
Again,
and I've been listening, and it's great. I've really enjoyed the podcast. It's good
We need
stuff.
you back, Greg. We've got a lot more to talk about.
Yeah, you bet.
Awesome. Appreciate the time again. Thanks, Greg.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.